Caring for aging parents can certainly be difficult from an emotional standpoint, physical standpoint, and a financial standpoint. So let's talk about some things to think about this week here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and I as we talk about the not so fun but needed conversation, Phil, of dealing with an aging parent. Last week we had an email question from a listener about the HSA we were talking about, and so we've got one from a listener this week we're going to address as well in regards to dealing with an aging parent. And many of us have gotten to this position the last number of years, Phil, where we maybe have an aging parent and an adult kid. That's
quote unquote sandwich generation.
Yeah, we're sandwiched, right? So it's affecting a lot of people, right? So it's a worthwhile conversation to have. You doing all right this week?
Yeah, doing good. Really good.
Yeah.
Starting to warm up, spring's in the air. So
yeah, you're not in that situation, but you still do have aging parents, just like I have one.
Yep.
That I help out with. And for a little while we had the daughter at home that we were helping out with as an adult, but she's doing awesome on her own now. So luckily we've avoided that for now. But I'm in a similar boat here as Tim. Our question from this week is from a guy named Tim. And he says his mom's 93 years old. And has fallen a couple of times in the house, and I can relate to that one as well.
Yep.
So he's like, basically, I'm wondering, is it time for us to hire somebody to come help her out or move her in with us? She doesn't have the money to pay for that care, so we're going to be absorbing that, my wife and I. And I'm just kind of wondering what's the cheaper option. And I know a lot of people wind up dealing with this, right? So it's like starting to look at how do you do it. So we've got some questions to kind of run down for for Tim and other listeners to maybe think about if they're in that same kind of situation, right? What's the true costs of caring for somebody? So let's get into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot to that because there's the financial cost, obviously, but I mean, there's the emotional part of it too, of, whether they're in the home with you or, you're having somebody help care for them. I mean, you're always wondering, okay, what's going on? Is everything okay? As they start to age, especially with, a parent like this, it's fallen a couple of times. So they clearly have had some medical concerns already. Right. And so you've got to look at both sides of that, especially in this case, when you're considering, okay, well, which direction do we head? And there's from a cost standpoint, a financial cost. I mean, at first you might think, well, it might be cheaper to keep them in the house, and it could be.
Yeah, I mean, depending on your house setup, right?
Depending on the house setup, because I mean, if they're already able to live comfortably and efficiently in their own home, meaning it's able to be assessed by wheelchair or walker. I mean, that's kind of the next big step. If it's a single story, everything's on the same floor, then it may be less expensive financially to have somebody come in, but then you have that concern of, well, are they really taking care of, mom in this case?
Right.
So how do you handle that? Do you get cameras? I mean, it seems kind of invasive. I mean, there's, you get all these emotional things to consider, and what do you do? And now you've got a stranger in the house, and are they, rifling through mom's valuables? I mean, there's all these different things.
Unfortunately, it's a minefield. It really is, right?
It is.
So so I guess, you could think about the practical, maybe the placement, right? Your home or their own home.
Right.
And then that changes, the variables from there. One of the things to kind of think about, I think if you bring them to your home and you're trying to do this yourself, let's just say your home is set up okay for it, and that's not a big deal financially.
Right. So it's a single story, and
it's not a big deal financially, but start thinking about the physical and the emotional cost, right? Because
absolutely.
Depending on what's going on with mom, she's fallen right now. So, in this particular case, but it could be worse, could be more later on.
Right.
Does someone have to stop working to be there with them all the time? Or just the physical act, maybe Tim can pick up his mom because he's a sizable guy or whatever, but maybe his wife can't, I mean, they're like, there's all these, it gets really,
there's a ton of factors to consider. So.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a huge point to consider of, well, because at first you might think, it's cheaper just to bring them into the house. Okay, well, that's great. But
I got this. Yeah, we'll take care of it. Yeah.
Well, who's going to take care of her then? I mean, she obviously needs care.
Yeah.
So if you're both working full time, And if it's Tim's mom, does his wife, if she's the one that's going to maybe quit, or maybe she's not working, does she want to, or can she do that?
Right.
Does she have the ability to be able to take care of her mother-in-law at that point?
And if one of you do step away from work, think about your own financials on that. Now think about
right now. Yeah. So that's a big cost, so to speak. I mean,
your retirement, are you jeopardizing your retirement because you both needed to work for X number of years to get there, or whatever the case? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other side, from a more emotional, as you bring them into your own home, is you've got a kid at the house again. I mean, it's kind of how it works, is your privacy's gone.
My mom is 83, and I swear she's a teenager a lot of times. There's stuff that, and I'm like, I didn't realize, do we go back to being a teenager when we get into our upper 70s or whatever? Because it seems like it. She does a lot of teenage type things. Anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, unless you have a mother-in-law suite where they have their own quarters, where, maybe their own bathroom, their own bedroom, and a sitting TV room or something like that. But if that isn't the case, let's say you've got just your living room, your family room where you watch TV. Okay. Who gets to pick the channel? Yeah.
Well, she does if you don't want to argue.
Right. You're going to watch Jeopardy, all the different, I mean, it's all.
You're going to watch Jag 24/7.
Yeah. It's all these things to consider of, it's I understand that you want to help your mom. But you've got to look at it from your perspective too. Is that the right thing for both of you? Because at the end of the day, I mean, if you've lost that privacy and now, you're trying to work together in the house, and it's all good. We'll work it out. But 3, 6, 9 months, a year, 2 years into this, I mean, that starts to wear on a relationship, and you don't want that to come between you guys where now you're battling it.
For sure. Yeah.
And it's just an emotional battle because of, trying to fit two households into one. So
and let's be honest, right? We could go with the stereotypes, whether it's mom or it's dad. You've got those personality conflicts. You maybe have the wife and the mother-in-law. They're not necessarily always going to be jiving together. And some families are great, and other families there's tension. There's all those extra components too. Well, let's talk about some financial pieces. Are there some tax breaks or government programs or different strategies that people maybe should look into that are in situations like this?
I mean, if it's mom in her own house, there could be some tax breaks for her if it's a qualified medical expense.
Okay.
Then we get into the whole itemized deduction, and that qualified medical expense has to be more than 7.5% of their income. Mm-hmm. So there could be from her standpoint. If you bring her into your house, now we get into this fuzzy gray area, because especially if you're now paying for a lot of those expenses, well, is she a dependent or not?
Okay.
I mean, she's clearly living with you now. So, I mean, that kind of is a checkbox in your column. Okay, she's a dependent.
Right.
You have to provide more than half her support.
Gotcha.
So that's the other side of it too. And I mean, granted, so now you can take into account, well, you're, paying for some of the expenses of the house because that relates to her. She's living there now, if you're paying for medical expenses, but she still has income.
Mm-hmm. Does that count? Does that count, Phil? If she's still on her own in her own apartment, but let's say you're paying half the rent, or you're paying for the healthcare provider to come in, or you're buying the groceries, can you still do it that way? Can you still kind of claim them as a dependent?
Now you've lost. They're not living with you.
Okay. No, even though you're providing half of their resources.
Right.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it would be tough to get to half of their resources. I mean, unless they're obviously like in a facility.
Okay.
Where you're paying more than half of what that cost is. I mean, just think of, because their resources are going to be Social Security, pensions, whatever it is.
Right. I was thinking of situations where maybe it's Social Security only and it's not quite enough to get by or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and you'd have to look at that scenario to see, but chances are it's not going to work in that case because they're not living with you at that point.
Gotcha. Okay.
So,
Yep. Is it state by state too? Is every state going to be a little different with some of the things?
No, that's more the federal side. I mean, the state side of it. So getting the other side of it, getting some governmental assistance, that's more going to be Medicare.
Right.
Or Medicaid, I mean, where that is going to be a state program. So that is state specific.
Okay.
quasi state federal. I mean, the Fed funds a lot of it, but it's administered by the state. So in each individual state kind of has their rules and guidelines on how it works. But yeah, so they could qualify potentially for like Medicaid, if they're on their own, if they don't have enough resources.
Gotcha.
But again, Medicaid isn't going to pay for, typically like your home care and things like that. It's maybe when you get to that final stage of now they're in a facility of some sort.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
Yeah. Well, he had mentioned in his message, in his email to us that she didn't have a lot of money to cover the cost. So I was just kind of trying to cover some different bases. But for real quickly though, for folks who maybe are, have an aging parent, but they actually do have some resources, it's worthwhile to have a conversation with your parent to say, hey, listen, Mom, you've been falling, you need to maybe let me start to handle some of this stuff, or what kind of long-term care insurance do you have? Things of that nature, right? If you don't know that stuff, it's definitely time to have those chats.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that is part of our initial onboarding with a new client or a prospective client, even finding out about their scenario. Is there somebody that you might have to provide financial support for in the future, like an aging parent like this? I mean, if you have a parent that they have limited resources, it's inevitable at some point they're going to need some kind of care, some assistance.
Right.
So who's going to provide that if they can't? Do we have to build into your financial plan?
Oh, good point.
Two, 3, 4, 5, 10,000 a month for how long is that something that you, number one, want to take on or can take on financially?
Right.
Or, if you can't, then, okay, well, then that's when you get to the Medicaid route where now maybe they have to ultimately get the support through Medicaid, but that can't happen in home. That's going to be more, in a facility type of scenario. So,
well, he didn't mention whether she had her own home. He just said that, she's on her own at 93. Right. So we don't know if she's in an apartment or if she's in a house. But if you are in a house, what kind of options might, your kids be able to kind of look at there?
Right.
We've heard the million times, we've gotten questions before like, hey, my parent, should I sign over my house to my kids so that Medicare doesn't take it, that kind of thing, or Medicaid doesn't take it. And we've talked about that. That's usually never a good idea to go that route. But what could people do if they do have the home there they could use?
Yeah. So again, not an attorney, so seek legal advice on this.
Sure.
But you've got to be very careful in passing assets along, especially if you're going to, at some point, or that parent's at some point going to qualify for Medicaid.
Yeah, passing it along while you're alive, right?
While you're alive, because there is this look back period.
Right.
Now that being said, typically how Medicaid works is if you've got to spend down all your assets, I think you can have like $2,000 in Michigan.
Yeah, you got to be broke.
You can have a car and you can have a house. So they can't make you sell your car. They can't make you sell your house.
Right.
But the key to it is this. So let's say she's qualified for Medicaid now. She's in a facility. You still have the house. They can't force you to sell that to pay for the facility. What Medicaid will do, though, is that when she passes, they will file a claim in probate against her estate for all the money that they paid. So if that house isn't set up in such a way to avoid probate, well, the house gets put in probate, and even though they didn't force you to sell the house, they end up getting paid from the proceeds of the house because they have a claim.
Right.
So there is some planning to do to help hedge, if that's kind of the route you're heading. So,
gotcha. Okay. Anything I didn't hit you with, or any kind of thoughts that you want to chime in on when it comes to dealing with an aging parent?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit on the emotional side, and I don't know, I think it was Tom's scenario. Tim's scenario.
Yep.
It sounds like maybe he's an only child. I don't know.
Yeah, he doesn't mention whether he has any help. That's another great point.
I was going to say, because this is where it gets really complex and can get tense and emotional, is what if there's more than one sibling? There's 2 or 3. Well, who's gonna take care of mom?
Yeah,
right?
You're not helping out as much as I am.
Right? Are we okay? So
I'm looking at you.
are we taking shifts? And one of them's out of town. So, well, do they just get a pass because they don't live here?
Right. Right.
And if there's only one that's in town, the other, I mean, it's all these different things that you got to really consider.
And if you don't figure out a way to talk through it, Phil, you really can damage your relationships, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes siblings have great relationships, and sometimes they have, rocky relationships, and it can only make it worse if you're not being kind of forthright and talking with each other and being somewhat fair. Right. My brother and I get annoyed with my brother on a regular basis because I'm like, hey, I need you to take the old lady someplace. And he's like, oh, I don't want to. And I'm like, I don't care if you want to. You got to help out,
That's right. It's your turn.
It's your turn, right? And so, we try not to get too touchy about it, but, it's one of those things. It's unfortunate fact of life, and say what you will about our healthcare system or about how we do stuff, but aging parents is something we are all, if you're lucky, you're going to have to deal with. Exactly. It's weird, right? If you're lucky and you're unlucky, because it's like on the one hand, it's like, man, this is a lot of stuff, especially if they didn't plan well, which sounds like maybe Tim's mom didn't. But you can't beat them up for it either. You just got to deal with the situation in front of you and keep moving.
Right. It is what it is. And exactly. You got to pick it up where it's at and just kind of move forward with it.
Yeah.
The other emotional side of it too is that unfortunately, as people age, and especially if they get into a dementia type scenario,
sure. Yeah.
Some ways dementia kind of presents itself for people. Some people get really angry.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and that's where you've got to be careful too. Do you bring that into the house?
And then maybe you do need, I think with dementia, you really are looking at more professional care.
Yeah. Now at that point you might be looking at more of the outside,
which is rough because it's crazy expensive, right?
It is outrageous. Yeah. Especially if you get into that level of care.
Yeah.
Because it's more custodial care. I mean, those facilities are locked down because they don't want that aging parent to go walking off on
your silver alerts, right? You see the occasional silver alerts when somebody's wandered off. And thinking about, I guess, in that standpoint, maybe a lesson or a takeaway for our viewers or listeners that check out the show is that if you're not dealing with an aging parent, you may be an aging parent at some point. Yes. So maybe you need to go ahead and start talking with your advisor about how to plan to maybe not put this burden on your kids, right?
Right. Or, I mean, if you want to have more of those decisions, maybe you need to set things up ahead of time to say, well, this is what I want to do, crazy as it is, pick the facility out that you want to go to, right?
Yeah.
And this is how we're going to pay for it. So have some of those things ahead of time. Number one, it makes it easier for the kids because they're not having to go through all that and make decisions at that point. Plus, you're able to help make some of those decisions up front, and you can kind of build it in financially if that is your scenario and you have the resources to do that. So
yeah. Look, it's not fun, folks. We know it, right? Aging ourselves is at times stuff we don't want to talk about. Yep. Long-term care, let alone for our parent or whatever. So just bite the bullet and get the conversations going. So hopefully that you don't find yourself in a situation like Tim. Obviously, Tim, we get these email questions that come in. Phil and his staff reach out to them personally to have conversations. But, make sure that you're talking with an advisor. Sit down. Most advisors do consultations complimentary. So whatever situation you find yourself in financially, whether it's your own or your parent or whatever, have a chat. Talk to one or two different advisors. Find the one that's the right fit for you, and get some things in place. Get some things moving and deal with them now. Maybe before it gets like anything in life, right? It gets harder to deal with the longer we wait to tackle it.
It does. Yeah, it doesn't get any easier.
It does not get any easier.
It doesn't. It's not like cheese. It doesn't age well. So
right.
Or wine or whatever.
Wine. Yeah. So thanks for hanging out, folks. We always appreciate it. As always, don't forget to subscribe to us on whatever podcasting app you like to use, audio form, Apple or Spotify. YouTube, obviously, for video form as well. And of course, I guess the audio is there also, but hit the thumbs up and the notification bell. That way you can catch new episodes when they come out. Support the channel, hit that subscribe button. And if you need some help, check the show links below to get in touch with Phil and have a conversation about your situation. You can find him online at philstaxhacks.com. And again, we have the show links in the description below. We'll see you next time here on the program. Thanks for breaking it down, Phil. Yep, appreciate you, brother. On Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.